want to thank everybody here in our small but vigorous audience for appearing in person in what are really, we know, are difficult circumstances. And we really wanted to have a live audience here so we could have personal interaction in the room. I think a lot of us have been missing that for a long time. We have a much larger virtual audience, and I thank them as well, but I'm particularly grateful to people who are here in person, vaccinated, masked, socially distanced, everything else, but here in person, and I thank you for that. When I worked on the staff of the Senate Governmental Affairs Committee, when I first started back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Senator Glenn was chairman of the committee. And we used to hold hearings on things like inventory management and property management and working capital funds, really exciting issues that grabbed most people's attention. And I remember Senator Glenn used to characterize that as, and he did this publicly at hearings on more than one occasion, as the grunt work of government. And I think of that today because when you think of grunt work, who better to do it than a Marine? And our first speaker, Bob Work, is a former Undersecretary of the Navy, a former Deputy Secretary of Defense, but I think he would agree is first, last, and always a Marine. So the perfect Deputy Secretary of Defense, in other words. We know that the position of Undersecretary of Defense, those of us who've worked in the department know that the position of Undersecretary of a service or position of Deputy Secretary of Defense is the dumping ground for all the work that the Secretary doesn't want to do. And so the rumor was always that the inbox of the Deputy Secretary would grow at about a pace of about 6 feet a day. And it takes a unique kind of person to deal with that kind of workload and to do it with the kind of grace and dignity and always with a smile on his face as Bob Work did. I didn't make his job any easier, I don't think, when I was on Capitol Hill, in part because I was instrumental in enacting legislation that made both the Undersecretary of the Navy and the Deputy Secretary of Defense, respectively, the chief management officers of their organization. So as if they didn't have enough work to do already, we decided to load more on them. I'm sure there are other ways that Bob can tell you that I made his life more difficult, but that certainly stands out. What I discovered when I got to Capitol Hill is that Bob Work may have had the biggest inbox in federal government, but that if he suffered from the burden, he never showed it. He had a perfect management style, as far as I was concerned. First, he always had a smile on his face. He was always happy to see you, no matter what bad news you were bringing. But the key to me was, and the way that I think he was able to deal with that incredible workload and be so effective was, Bob knew how to delegate, and he knew how to delegate and remain engaged so that he would retain ownership of an issue even when he delegated it. And to me, that's the key to management in the Department of Defense, where the spans of control for senior officials are so great that you really can't hope to take on issues yourself and do them the way I used to do them at Capitol Hill and just sort of be a one-person team and think you were going to pursue your issue from start to conclusion. You can't do that as Deputy Secretary of Defense. You have to rely on others, but you can't fire and forget. And I think that Bob was a master of that. He delegated, but he remained engaged at all stages, which is the perfect model for senior management. And in my view, the only workable model for management reform in the Department of Defense. So with that, I won't say anything more about it, but I'd like to introduce my former boss and my favorite Deputy Secretary of Defense, Bob Work.
And good morning, everyone, both here in the room and virtually. I must admit, when Peter asked me to give the keynote at a conference on defense reform, I suffered a bad case of PTSD. Except for a year off mid-stride, I spent from 2009 to 2017 as a top official in the Pentagon. First, as Peter said, as the Undersecretary of the Navy, and second as the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Now, in these roles, I served under 5 different Secretaries of Defense: Gates, Panetta, Hagel, Carter, and Mattis. Now, each of these accomplished gentlemen brought their own unique leadership style to the Pentagon, as well as priorities of what they wanted to accomplish in the job. But they all shared a common desire, and that was to pursue efficiencies and reform the inner workings of the department while they had the helm. And these pursuits, quite frankly, were the cause of my PTSD. Now, my efficiency and reform journey started in 2009 with Bob Gates' efficiencies drill. just as I assumed the role of Undersecretary of the Navy. With the withdrawal of Iraq right around the corner and a projected withdrawal from Afghanistan by the end of the FIDP, Secretary Gates told all of us politicals at the time that we needed to tighten our belts for the inevitable post-war drawdown. And he directed each of the 3 military departments. I'm sure I'm telling most of the people in this room something you already know. They said, you're going to find $40 billion in efficiencies over the FIDP and redirect those savings from what he referred to as tail to tooth. In other words, he was trying to improve the lethality of the department and the capability of the department. Now, to make plain, these weren't going to be true savings. In other words, we weren't dropping the defense top line. The service department, the military departments were told, you will retain all the money, you'll just reallocate them to higher priorities. Now, most folks, including me, I never really thought of this as producing true efficiencies. We thought of it as having to hit a budgetary target. Bob Hale, who was the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller at the time, he explained the process in terms of improved performance. And he stretched the definition of efficiencies to be more efficient use of defense resources. Now, under this rubric, we were able to take credit for program cancellations, reductions in planned procurement buys, stretches of programs, and the like. And by doing so, and aided by some creative accounting, all 3 of the departments ultimately hit their efficiency targets. Now, the creative accounting, for those of you who've worked in the Department of Defense, come in the form of negative wedges. You project how much savings you think your efficiencies and reforms will accrue over the course of the FIDP, and you lay that in a negative wedge. You're taking the money out and reallocating it to some higher priority. Now, of course, and this is one of the main challenges of defense reform, is if you don't hit your targets, you have to take it out of something in the program that you have already said, this is a very high priority for us, and we'd have to retain it. So it's always a struggle. Now, then came the Budget Control Act of 2011, which reduced expected yearly defense top lines by about $490 billion over 10 years. And this caused the call for more efficiencies and business reforms to be even more pointed. No one in the department wanted to cut joint force muscle, so we all went after what we thought was departmental fat. Now, these first efforts, I went back and read Undersecretary of Defense Bob Hale's testimony before Congress that year, and it led to $78 billion in projected defense-wide savings from 2012 through 2016. Now, these included slowing the growth in military healthcare costs, a freeze on civilian billets, a 30% cut in contractors, a reduction in downgrade of flag and general officer and flag SES billets. And wow, what the building thinks really came into that, and additional program reductions. And so you can see, just the way I've described them, you can argue whether they're efficiencies or not, but they certainly saved a lot of money. The $78 billion across the defense, and then another $100 billion from the military departments, $35 billion of which came from the Department of the Navy. And as I said, some of these savings qualified as true efficiencies and reforms, such as staff consolidations. There was a raft of those. We got rid of the Joint Forces Command. There were a lot of getting rid of commands that we didn't think were that important or were duplicative, and we consolidated as many. Those, I thought, were true efficiencies and could qualify as true reforms. But in the end, I think most of us would admit that most of the savings came from program cancellations or program slips and reductions in planned buys. Still, $178 billion is nothing to sneeze at. Now, again, going back to the negative wedge problem, let's say that you were off by 10%, that you overestimated your savings by 10%. That meant over the FIDP, $17.8 billion of savings that you were expected did not come about and you would have had to go into the program and pry that back out in some other way. But there was no rest for the weary. Hot on the heels of the 2011 Budget Control Act was sequestration, one of the best things that's ever happened to the Department of Defense. And that reduced planned future yearly defense top lines by another $500 billion out through 21. Now, by this time, believe it, I mean, nobody's thinking in terms of efficiencies. They're thinking in terms of keeping their program viable. So everyone was scrambling for any savings wherever they might be found, including at least 4 rounds of efficiency drills covered over this period of time. So I come back as a deputy secretary in 2014, and we were deep in the fight to adjust and fit the program to this much, much smaller defense top line than we expected in 2012. And at the time, our reform agenda was being spearheaded by a deputy chief management officer, which is what we had in the department at the time, reporting directly to the deputy secretary. That was Dave Tillotson, who came out of the Department of the Air Force and was a tremendous person, because he really knew where a lot of the bodies were buried, and he really knew what the building thought. So he was quite effective. But when it came time to close the books, if we were short on funds, I would go to Dave and say, Dave, we need to find some efficiencies to close this gap. And he always said, aye, aye, sir. And he always did it. Now then, Peter replaced Dave in April of 2015. And I think you were the first confirmed deputy chief management officer, second confirmed deputy chief management officer. And I couldn't agree more with what Peter says. I personally think that CMO was a good idea in principle, but doesn't work in the department, because unless the person really driving the reforms or changes through has the direct backing of either the deputy or the secretary, it's very, very hard to get traction and get things done. And Peter was the, if he calls me the perfect boss, he was the perfect partner and the perfect DCMO. He would go down and do all the knuckle fights. I mean, all of the bare knuckle fights with the services, and come back and say, okay, we could do this, but here's the pushback we're going to get. Are you prepared to take it? And sometimes we'd argue and say, look, this isn't a fight we need to fight now. Let's fight that next year. Let's go for the savings that we can book. But together we did decide to enlist the Defense Business Board to help us pursue true reform agendas. Now, the first rule of being a senior official in any administration, Republican or Democrat, is to never, and I mean never, ever, be the subject of a story in the Washington Post. Well, I'm sorry to say I had that honor in a page 1 story above the fold by Bob Woodward, for God's sake. And basically what the story said was the department could save $125 billion over 5 years by pursuing the efficiencies identified by the board of directors, but the deputy secretary, that would be me, refused to move on them. Kerfluffle, kerfluffle. Now, essentially, the bulk of the savings would come from a 7% reduction in the civilian workforce. You say, let's cut the civilian workforce by 7%. That's going to save a lot of money. And if you do it in the first year, in other words, you just have a wholesale RIF, you'll accrue a lot of money over the FITIP. The second thing was renegotiate every service contract in the department in 1 year, and renegotiate with the eye of making them a lot less expensive. Now, the DBB didn't tell us how to accomplish this. Essentially, they looked at Peter and say, okay, Peter, we told you what you got to do. Now go do it. Figure it out. But lost in the kerfluffle of this Washington Post story was that the DBB report was really quite valuable, and goes to Nordy's said that the DBB can really be helpful to the Department of Defense. Now, up until this report, the efficiency drills that we conducted were all in stovepipes. They were in either a specific agency or a military department. We would give them a budget bogey they have to hit. You have to become more efficient by 10%. In other words, you need to cut what you're doing by 10%. Figure it out. And after years of efficiency drills, these efforts were providing ever decreasing returns. All the easy stuff had been taken off the table. Jamie, I didn't recognize you without your mask. Now, although coming later, the Army's recent night court reform effort shows the limits of going after a stovepiped efficiency. In the Army's night court, their first round was FY 2020. It moved $22.4 billion over the 5-year budget plan, eliminated 93 programs, and reduced 93 others. The second round, 1 year later, moved $13.5 billion, eliminated 41 programs, and reduced 39. And the third round in FY 22, just completed, moved $9.1 billion, eliminating just 7 programs and reducing 37. So over a 3-year period of successive efficiency drills, you went from saving $22.4 billion down to 9.1. And that's what we were finding in all of these stovepipes. You know, we were just playing out the vein. Now, the same thing is happening as we pursued successive rounds of efficiency and reform savings. Quite frankly, the savings were just drying up. The DBB suggested that we curtail that activity and turn our attention to across enterprise efficiencies. You know, this is like a gobsmack. Of course, we should be doing that, but it was the DBB that said, look, snap out of it. You're not going to get what you need by doing these stovepipe drills. You got to go after cross-departmental efficiencies. And they helped us because they forced all of the senior decision makers to say, what are the management processes that cross all of the department? And it's acquisition management, IT management, financial management, human resource management, healthcare management, logistics management, real estate management. We have a tremendous real estate business in the Department of Defense, and retail management. We have a tremendous retail operation. And each of these management processes were performed across the department. So in the DBB's estimation, and we agreed with them, it seemed a safe bet that if we started to consolidate across these, that you gain some serious savings, and we agreed with them. But in order to identify true efficiencies and to figure out the savings, we needed to determine the baseline spending across all of these processes. We didn't track how much we spent in the process itself. It was all, you know, in budget lines in each of the departments, et cetera. And so we started to do just that. And in so doing, we concluded that the department, regardless of what people outside the department think, we're damn good at financial accounting. You know, we don't spend more money on ships than Congress tells us to. It's actually against the law. But we're good at that. But we are not good in cost accounting. Our cost accounting just did not give senior leaders in the DCMO the data that they would have to do to say, okay, we have a problem here and we can become more efficient. So we said, hey, we have to really improve our cost accounting methods. And therefore we established working groups to do just that. And we did it by each of the processes. I believe, Peter, we started with real estate. That real estate was the first one. And what we would do is we would look across, how does the Air Force manage real estate, the Army and the Department of the Navy? And we say, wow, the Department of the Army is doing exactly what the Department of the Navy is doing for 20% less. Why? What are they doing? Is it just a regional type thing, or is it something because they've cracked the code better? And this work started what I think of as the second great wave of defense reform in the Department of Defense. The first wave from, now again, I'm only talking about my experience, so you'd have to adjust this going back all the way to 2001 when Congress told the department to get their act together on defense reform. But the first wave from 2009 to 2016 really focused on hitting in these stovepipes. And the second wave from 2016 to the present remained focused on defense-wide efficiencies, but expanded this focus to include these cross-enterprise savings. So look, I'll be perfectly honest. I probably shouldn't be saying this in a conference on defense reform. 10 years of management reform efforts, I don't know if it's made the department more efficient. I just don't know. The past decade first saw a sharp drop in defense spending from the BCA and then sequestration, made much worse by the chaotic way it was implemented, followed by a rapid, if short-lived, defense buildup, all overlaid by continuing resolutions and 2-year budget balance agreements, which made long-term planning, look, it was difficult at best. So what I can say with certainty is that we managed to cram the program into the budgets we were given. And that, although it's not really widely recognized by Congress, was a heroic achievement, in my view. Now, on the other hand, I would tell you that this decade made the department more budgetarily resilient. We were able to take budget punch after budget punch, and we were still able to maintain a semblance of program coherence and continuity. But budget resilient doesn't buy you much outside the Department of Defense. And in this regard, I think we need a reset in our departmental reform efforts, and now is a great time to do it. So this conference, I think, is on the leading edge of this. First, as it so happens, the FY22 budget process provides a new definition of reform. It is defined as an improvement of processes, systems, policies, and procurement that increases effectiveness, efficiency, or reliability. All of that, is heard before. But here's the killer: to best align the department's resources with its priorities. Now, as a Deputy Secretary of Defense, I love this decision because it gives a concrete aim for departmental efforts to align our resources with its priorities. And it gives us something to go to Congress with and say, this is what we accomplished. And it gets us away from arguing over whether or not we saved 10 billion on Reform X or 12 billion. And it says, look, did this move of resources, does it make sense in the framework of our strategy? And as far as I'm concerned, that's a righteous goal, especially now as we find ourselves in a long-term strategic competition with two great power rivals. And we simply can't afford frittering away resources on things that don't contribute materially to winning that competition. Everything else doesn't matter. There's an old saying that everything worth doing isn't worth doing well. And that's exactly what we're talking about. We need to put things on the cutting room floor that we would like to do if we had the money, but if it doesn't contribute to the long-term strategic competition, it doesn't count. Now, second, we're entering a period of flat budgets. We're projecting flat budgets. And in my view, that is the only way you can really tackle true efficiencies. If you're coming down by $1 trillion over a 10-year period, what's an efficiency and what's just trying to survive? But when you have a flat budget projection, you can say, okay, if we go in and we become 15% more efficient in this particular process, we're going to be able to put this money back into the strategic competition, et cetera. So having a flat budget, in my view, is the perfect kind of environment for defense reform efforts to happen. Third, as I've said, the first and second waves of reform have run their course. The FY22 reforms yielded only modest savings, 6.1 billion overall. They came primarily from divestments, business process improvements, and policy reform, and only $200 million savings from business system improvement, which was aimed at eliminating legacy business systems and processes to increase the effectiveness and reduce duplications in IT business systems. Now, it must be said, the new team, they didn't have a lot of time to really dig in and go after reform. They came in, they had a program that was recommended by the outgoing administration. And the first thing first was to, what did the outgoing administration do in the program? Does it reflect our priorities? What changes do we have to make? And of course, they're under a time problem. They have to get that budget up on the hill as quickly as possible. So there are probably more reform savings that could have been had, but they just didn't have the time to dig in and do them. But the paucity of savings found in the FY22 budget, as well as the experience of the Army Nice Court, suggest that these stovepipe deficiency drills had run their course, and the veins that we have mined for the last decade have played out. So we need to adjust our mining techniques. So fourth, we now have access to technology that can support such new mining techniques. I'll call it decision science, the targeted application of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data at scale. Now, I conceive of decision science as the fracking in the reform business. We went down our veins, now we can go cross vein, and we can find savings that way. And it can be used to quickly develop comprehensive and indisputable baselines of where and how DoD's money is being spent across the enterprise. Armed with this knowledge, the department can deliberately and systematically ensure its resources are aligned with its priorities. I'll come back to this, but one of the biggest problems in the department for anybody who's worked in this business, Peter, Jamie, Nordy, all of you, people don't share data. They don't want to give up data because for 10 years, they say, I don't want to become an efficiency target, right? I want somebody to come in and say, hey, I need you to be 15% more efficient because I know they're going to just take my money. But now with this decision science, you can see where the money is going and you can tell it down to the penny and the part number if you want to go that far. So decision science, I think, is going to be key to the third wave of defense management and reform. And the foundation for this is found in good data management and analytics. So the very first step the department has to do to get on this, keep this reform journey going, is to gather, collate, and make usable all available relevant data inside and critically outside the department. Many of our data efforts just look at data inside the Department of Defense. But there is a large amount of data outside the Department of Defense that would materially help us make decisions. I'm thinking of supply chain risk management. You know, there's a lot of information outside the department that would help people inside the department trying to figure out where vulnerabilities in the supply chain really exist. Now, GAO, I'm not telling you anything that the GAO hasn't already said. They say that the DoD's reform efforts are constantly hampered by the lack of reliable data of how we perform our business functions. Now, we've already made some strides to use better data to inform decision-making. It's spearheaded by David Norquist that you're going to hear this afternoon, and has really been picked up and continued by Deputy Secretary Hicks. And so in that regard, I think we're on the right track and we're building momentum. Now, Deputy Secretary Hicks has been extraordinarily active in this regard. I think you all know she established the department's first chief data officer. She issued a series of data decrees that said you will share your data. She has several priority data initiatives that aim to transform DoD into a data-centric organization. And as she puts it, she's on a mission to create, quote, decision advantage at all echelons from the battle space to the boardroom. So for the first time, we have the opportunity to know with precision where and how money is being spent in every stovepipe, in every agency in the Department of Defense. And when you have that sight picture, wow, now you have the basis for a true reform effort. Now, data decrees are a necessary step in an organization as hierarchical and stovepiped as DoD, but you have to remember all the time, data sharing is an unnatural act in the Pentagon. It's likely that both Secretary Austin and Secretary Hicks are going to need to lean on organizations to cough up their data and punish those that don't. And when I say punish, I mean take money away. But let's assume they'll be successful. And even if they are, however, its data initiatives are necessary but not sufficient to yield decision advantagement and resource alignment. The amount of data that is in the Department of Defense defies the imagination. It's just enormous. And so the amount of data that can be collected, we know is going to be huge. It's far beyond the ability of any single person, even one as talented as Peter, to try to make sense of it all. And the amount of data is growing exponentially because our systems are becoming smarter and they're generating new additional forms of data. At the current rate, it's not hard to imagine that we'll be inundated with so much data that we'll be as addled as when we didn't have enough data. We'll just be inundated and we won't know really what to do with it. And if the data isn't helping you make better resource alignment decisions, then it's not much more helpful when you were data poor. So to achieve decision advantage, DoD must effectively collect and manage data. It must effectively make sense of it in a way that allows senior decision makers to make better decisions. The thing that Sandy Winnefeld, who was my battle buddy in the Deputy Management's Action Group, he was the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We were always astounded at the lack of decision quality data that would come before us in a decision forum, which was just trying to make sense and make the best possible decisions. Usually came in the form of a PowerPoint slide. The PowerPoint slide had stoplight charts. There were a lot of red meatballs and there were yellow and there was green. And that was the basis a lot of times for how we made decisions. Now, Jamie, who was the director of CAPE at the time, really tried to start changing this. So we started to get read aheads that really said, okay, this is how much we think we're spending on hypersonics. This is how much we think we're spending on stealth. This is what our war games tell us. What are the relative bang for the buck if you spend a marginal extra dollar on stealth or a marginal extra dollar on hypersonics? Where is the payoff? So for the first time, we were getting information. We're saying, okay, I can see this. We're going to stop this hypersonics program and we're going to put more money into 6th-gen fighters. I'm just making examples. And machine learning applications, a aspect of artificial intelligence, hi John, is just, this is the way we crack this code. Because it can process all these data, it can make inferences, it can even make predictions about future conditions, and at remarkable speed. If you're running DMAGs every other day, machine learning can keep up with you. In fact, it will outrun you. So Secretary Hicks clearly recognizes the key link between data and AI, as indicated by her ADA initiative, AI and Data Accelerator. But again, this is all about best aligning the department's resources with its priorities. The priorities are laid out in the National Defense Strategy, and we, the Deputy Secretary and the Vice Chairman, with all of the help of the department, is trying to make sure we have a program that best aligns those two. Now, it's not as simple as it sounds. DoD priorities are often stated in strategic and operational terms like modernize the joint force for greater lethality. Okay, I got it. But that's not something that really translates into budget lines and things like that. You have to make judgments on exactly what it means. So how to solve this problem? And there is a form of decision science called customized taxonomization of data. What you can do is say, here is the objective. And you ask the machine learning, how does the spend throughout the department in every single nook and cranny, how does it fall out? And the AI will actually make a taxonomization and say, okay, fires. And it will say, here are all the things that you're doing in fires. That makes you more lethal. Here are all the things that you do in command and control. That allows you to control the fires. Here's all the things that you're doing in logistics. And it does that for the decision maker. And it says, look, over the last 3 years, the amount of money that you're spending in fires has gone up 15%. And you look at each other and you say, yeah, that makes sense. We're really trying to improve the quality and the type and the variety of fires that we can apply on the battlefield. But then you go to another one and it says, hey, you're spending less money in logistics than you did 3 years ago. And you're saying, look, the National Defense Strategy says you have to get ready for contested logistics. The spending less money in logistics makes sense based on this requirement. And you say, no, it doesn't. So we better start shifting money back into logistics. Now, I learned of this when I left as the department, as the deputy. Sandy Winnefeld had joined this decision science company. And he says, hey, you have to come over and look at this. So I come over and I walk in, I didn't know what to expect. And they said, we're going to show you a taxonomization of the third offset strategy. Talk about snapback. We're going to give you something on the third offset strategy. And they had a taxonomization. And their machine, as I said, can go down to every single contract in effect in the Department of Defense, down to the penny and to the part number. And what they would do is say, okay, we went and read one of your speeches and you said this. And then they would tell me what the contract said, what the contract was asking for. And in many cases, I would just sit there and shake my head and go, what in the hell were they thinking? That doesn't track at all with my big grand idea. So this is the type of things that this can do, these taxonomizations can do, and they're very, very good. And so the real magic will come when the department gathers all of its data, and I mean all of it, and applies decision science at scale at the enterprise-wide level. Many of DoD's current efforts apply new data and AI are manifesting themselves in pilots. There's pilots everywhere. In a recent survey by the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, there are right now 108 different technology tools to inform decisions on supply chain risk management, 108. Each of the 108 probably have things about them that are really good, but there's 108 of them and they're all going on simultaneously. No one's looking from the top and saying what's best of breed. None of these tools talk to each other. So many of these subscale scrim tools are duplicative and therefore resource inefficient. And we want to get efficiency in this, especially because supply chain risk management is a very high priority for the department. So that's what we start to do is you need to start consolidating these things. Perhaps what you need to do is consolidate, pick a best of breed and say, we're going to do it at scale across the department. So everyone is using exactly the same tool. Everyone is drawing from exactly the same data. And you should start to get a true enterprise-wide picture of what the hell is happening. Because we're in the process, and we've been in the process in supply chain risk management, in my view, for 2 years on surveillance and investigation instead of deliberate remediation or mitigation. And we need to get to that step. So examples like this is why the National Security Commission on AI, which I was privileged to be the co-chair, lamented in its final report that DoD continues to reinvent core infrastructure for each new AI-driven project. There's unique infrastructure for every single project. And it goes on to recommend that DoD deploy a modern digital ecosystem. And what we meant by that is a system that was, I'm just gonna get my Coke here. Across the department, see all of the data. Excuse me. And it would be a place to have DevSecOps, a place, an algorithmic library that anybody could come and draw from, a place where data was centralized and everyone could draw from to train their machine learning algorithms. And it could perhaps be built on JAKES, the Joint AI Center's Joint Common Foundation. We did not have enough time to really say, okay, how far is this Joint Common Foundation going? Because it was an emerging idea and had not been fully laid out for the commission. But you can see you have to have this ecosystem, and we need to pursue that in some urgency. If you can get the data right, if you have your ecosystem, you have decision science tools, now you're cooking with gas. And we recommended the secretary require that every single joint and service program adhere to the design of the ecosystem. There would be no exceptions, zero, none. Now, maybe there might be an exception in an extremely highly classified SAP program. And because you needed to protect the data, you would have an exception. But in 99.9999999% of the times, everybody's being part of this. Because it's all about efficiency at scale. When you get to scale, you can really start trying to tackle efficiencies. Now, there's another move that the department might consider. You know, the chief data officer, Dave Spurk, the director of the JAIC, Lieutenant General Groen, and the director of the Defense Digital Service, and I'm sorry, now that Chris Lynch is left, I'm not certain who leads that, but they all are direct reports to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. And that's just, I think, too much for the deputy to handle. So one of the things would be to place them all under one chief data analytics officer. And you have data, AI, and software applications all in one place, coming up with the best ideas to get to scale. And they might be charged with the responsibility of coming up with the defense ecosystem, perhaps co-chaired with the CIO. Now, critically, one of the reasons why the CMO failed, in my view, is because it couldn't really be a change agent, because you had lost the connection between the person who was battling it out with the services and the deputy or the secretary. And you know, the CDAO would empower the principal staff assistants, the undersecretaries, to better wield their authority to make these efficiencies. And I think that is the way to go about this. As Nordy said, hold leaders accountable. Hold the undersecretaries accountable for the processes that are in their lanes and say, look, I expect you to become more efficient. I expect to see reforms that better align our resources to the program. Do it, and then report to me on how you're doing. Now, I've talked about decision science, but AI has all sorts of other applications, as I'm sure you know. In the commercial business, they're using AI for business process improvements just across the board in a wide variety of things. I work with one company that has a digital maintenance advisor. In its prototype phase, it reduced the time to diagnose and fix maintenance issues in an Air Force F-16 squadron by 25%. You put that across the F-16 fleet and you're starting to maximize fleet availability. It has improved inventory forecasting. It integrates right with the maintenance systems. It simplifies the workflows. It reduces the number of double data entries and part swaps. And increases the overall process efficiency of maintenance. And it's just by allowing AI to help the maintainers do their business. With natural language processing, I think you all know this, when an F-16 technician goes in to fix an F-16, he or she will do the fix. And then they'll write in their maintenance log, hey, this is how I did this. This is how I fixed it. I didn't really follow the book in this case because the book didn't apply. This is how you fix it. And with natural language processing, you can gather in all that input from all the maintainers, plus all of the policies and procedures and everything, and the AI makes sense of it all for you. I also have seen a digital science supply advisor that improves forecasting, eliminates uncertainty, and enhances supply chain resiliency. And they reduce item waste, they increase savings. A recent deployment of this capability, again, a prototype, saved $100 million annually. And these are just two examples of how AI can really help business process improvement. So a chief data and analytics officer employing data science and business process tools would provide the PSAs, the principal staff assistants, with the data advantage they need, give them reliable data about how DoD performs its business functions. Theirs in particular, a clear understanding of the baseline spend, of where their money is going and how closely they align with departmental priorities. It provides sufficient transparency and data lineage to obtain stakeholder buy-in with the baseline. Now, you're not going to get buy-in in all the time, but you'll be arguing over, data that is pretty straightforward and concretely developed, and the ability to find efficiencies across the enterprise. Now, my understanding, I've talked with Secretary Hicks, and she is considering a position very similar to this, one very much like it. If I had to guess, if she decides to do it, it would probably come within the next couple weeks. And I think that would provide a material step towards the third wave of defense reform in the department's journey. And I wish the department well on its journey. But I am happy to say I will not accompany them. I will simply sit on the sidelines and say, God, why did you do that? Or, wow, good idea. But, my PTSD will not allow me to continue on much farther. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks for doing this, Bob, and Peter, thank you. The spirit of the time, like I said, was speed. And speed to decision, as well as speed to execution. Could you speak up a little? Take that. The spirit of the times seems to be speed, and it's speed to decision as well as speed to execution. Seems to me that that's got to pervade sort of the three major decision support processes: resourcing, requirements, acquisition. How do you think about that as a metric, right? If your metrics for defense management reform can be efficiency, they can be effectiveness, they can be agility, alacrity. Is that a co-equal goal? Or is it just instrumental to get to the efficiency?
For those who are virtual, this is Jamie Moran, former director of CAPE. He was saying one of the metrics we use right now, kind of the zeitgeist of the times as he described it, is speed of relevance. And this is speed both in requirements determination, speed in budgetary formulations, speed and execution. And I think he's asking me if this is a good metric. Is that? So this is what I would say. The only way that you can materially speed up the processes that now exist in the Department of Defense is to inject AI decision support in the Department of Defense. That will very much at least give you the opportunity to speed things up. Now, I'm of two minds on this. Making decisions fast might be a good thing, but not if you're making bad decisions. So making bad decisions fast will simply make things worse. So to me, it really is about speed of alignment. How fast do the processes support the alignment of your resources with the department's priority? Can you make that faster? And the faster you make it, the more efficient you become, because you're not wasting resources and you're not wasting money on things that really don't count. So to me, that is the key metric. And I'd have to think about how we would measure it. Perhaps it would be, once the POM guidance is given, along with the defense strategic guidance, you'd have quarterly checks, and you would have these taxonomizations, and you would see how resources are starting to shift as a result of the guidance from the senior political and military leaders in the department. And I don't think you could do it much faster than a quarter, Jamie. I mean, I don't think the data would really be all that accurate, but that might be some way you could go about it. But I'd have to think about it. Does that answer your question? Yes, David.
To your summary of the history, I'm struck how much top down My question is whether you see any merit to a bottoms-up process. If so, what kind of incentives, any ideas of incentives actually make people interested in being more efficient, as opposed to having a large empire which is beside the anything in that vein?
For those offside, David asked, I've described in my history, I've pretty much described a top-down approach to efficiencies. Would there be an advantage in starting to move more to a bottom-up? And how do I think this would work? Is that close enough, David? Again, I think now the conditions are better set for bottom-up because, again, when you're losing $1 trillion in defense spending, it's pretty much got to be top-down. Because left to their own devices, the services will go after priorities that are valuable or very high priority to them. And you're looking for a unitary Department of Defense program. And therefore, you have to be kind of heavy-handed. No, you're not going to put money in this. You're going to put money over here. But when the budget is flat, then the services themselves have high incentive to become more efficient so that they can create top line space within their own devices. So I think it could actually, the third wave could actually have a much more healthy bottom up aspect. But again, it's a totally different budgetary future that we see, and one that I think provides incentives in and of themselves to everybody to get more efficient, to reform, save money, and move on. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Jennifer Taylor. I work here at IDA. My question is about the alignment of your digital ecosystem against the innovation ecosystem. Does it supplant it? Does it complement it? How do you see those two fitting together?
It's a very good question, Jennifer. The question is, the digital ecosystem that I described, does it in any way supplant the innovation ecosystem, complement it? Close. And I would say it complements it very, very much. The innovation ecosystem relies upon data. And it says, for example, the Air Force right now is leading the way in an AI-enabled program and budget process. I was just talking to Lisa Dispro, former Undersecretary of the Air Force and Secretary of the Air Force, acting secretary for quite some time, longtime J8er, and she knows a lot. And she says for the first time, the Air Force, the budget and the program development was totally seamless, and it was aided by AI. And the AI would do war games using data provided by the Department of the Air Force. And it would say, if you want to achieve this objective, this is the best way to deploy your resources. And if there were two competing things, innovation, should we go after a contested logistics innovation, or should we do this thing on fires? The AI would say, look, the strategic return on investment on this one, based on the war games you've provided, et cetera, is a better thing. And that helps the departments. They're getting bombarded by innovation ideas. And there are so many different, exciting technologies, and the small companies want to come in and say, look, if you deploy this, it is going to improve this by this much. But AI helps sort through this type of stuff, machine learning, and because machine learning is very good at making inferences and making predictions. AI, or in many cases, have been described as prediction machines. And prediction and innovation is absolutely central because you have so many competing ideas. You have to have some way to help you sort it out. So I think it's totally complementary, not in any way, shape, or form trying to supplant it. Yes, sir.
My name is Chris Hanks. I'll be on the panel later. I want to follow up on both what Mr. Warren said and what David asked about. Because I think it has to do both with speed and with bottom up. How would you describe, or what do you think the prospects are for being able to do the kinds of things you're talking about in the context of the PPBES, the system which the department uses to allocate its resources? It builds it from the bottom up, and it takes a long time for the PPBES to react to changing security conditions. Do you see, is it going to be important for it to be incorporated into the way PPBES decisions are made?
So the question is, another really good one, Chris, is it's following up on the idea of bottom up, doing more bottom up reform initiatives, as well as more speed in getting to them. And so the question is it consistent with the current PPBES that we have today? And I would say probably not. There's going to have to be some reform. But one of the dumbest things we did between 2009 and about 2017 is we ripped the guts out of CAPE. A lot of the analytical capability that the department had was lost. And so if we build that back up and a core of people who really understand these decision science tools, I believe we can meld them relatively easier. But I defer to Jamie, he's the expert on this, but I think we could meld them. But obviously there's going to have to be adjustments. I'm not smart enough to tell you what those adjustments might be right now. Do we have any from the outside?
Yeah, let me give you one from the outside.
You might want to take off your mask, Peter.
Let me give you one that came in from the virtual audience. As described, SCRM analytical tools are needed across the department, but has Congress provided the funding necessary to do this at scale?
Did everybody hear that? Has Congress provided the funding for SCRM to do it at scale? Congress is very interested in SCRM. They are constantly pushing. They had a task force on this subject itself. They are primed and ready to support, but I think the department will have to shift some resources into this and demonstrate that they're serious about going after a cross-enterprise SCRM solution. And if they do, there's no question in my mind that Congress will help and will provide funds to support it. There's no question in my mind. But I think the department has to make the first step. I think what Congress is saying is, look, you got 108 prototypes going. Okay, what's that doing for you? I mean, are you getting more secure? What type of metrics are you measuring this against? So the department has to make that first step. And if they do, as I said, my estimation, and Nora, you talk with Congress a lot, my estimation is they're ready to go. They're ready to push go.
Let me put you with one more from our virtual audience. And I think you may have one more, I'm not sure, but have you heard if the DoD is looking to move toward data brokering service or data mesh into what Jeff Bezos set up at Amazon with his Bezos mandate, instead of the data lakes is currently pursuing, like Advantage? The question says data lakes result in duplicative and out-of-date information. But are you familiar with the data brokering or data mesh approach?
So the question is, am I familiar with data brokering and data mesh approach as opposed to data lakes? And quite frankly, I don't know where the department is in this regard. If I had to bet, I'm pretty sure that Kath Hicks is thinking about this, along with Dave Spirk, the chief data officer. But no, I don't know.
We have time for one more in the room.
Okay. Yes, sir.
David Tate, IDA. The long-term trend of budget has been migration from R&D and procurement into ONS. We spend more of our money maintaining what we have instead of getting which cuts against that pace of modernization concern. What do you see as the long-term fix for that? What do we need to do?
We're seeing a lot of money migrate from innovation into ONS. And this, I will say what I said when I was the deputy secretary. The US Air Force is the poster child of this problem. They are the most over-regulated entity on the planet, bar none. We'd like to get rid of some of these old aircraft so we can buy new aircraft. Nope, got to keep them. We'd like to, shift money from here to there because this capability just doesn't provide us what we need against a high-end, great power competitor. Nope, can't do this. So, the Department of Defense recognizes this problem. They struggle with it every day. O&S and personnel costs go up faster than the rate of inflation. That's an objective fact that is proven by years of data. And unless you can handle that, you just have a problem each year. In fact, your efficiency and reform efforts might just be focused on that problem alone. Solve the problem of increasing personnel and O&S costs, make up for the money we're losing. On the Navy side, same thing. Man, you will talk with most Navy officers, and John, I think you'll agree with this, but if you don't, disagree. It's that the Navy just pushes money into O&S, and you ask in the DMAG, you say, what is causing this? And it's fact of life increases, stuff like that. There's really no, I think AI might help us say, what is causing this O&S shift? And are there any steps we can take to stop it? But man, we have to solve that, the problem. It's a perennial problem in the Department of Defense, and it's something that I hope on their reform journey, the Department of Defense will solve. And I wish them well. I thank you all. Listen, all of you are on the front line of what's happening in the Department of Defense. This is a consequential time for us. We are in a knockdown, drag out strategic competition. Yes, China is the pacing competitor, but Russia isn't bad in a whole bunch of areas like space, nuclear weapons, undersea capabilities. We're being pushed to the limit. So we've got to rethink of the way we are approaching reforms, and this is the time to do it. So thank you all for your interest in what you're doing to help us, and I wish you the best of luck.